So the takeaway is there's just no such thing as a healthy relationship in these books. Hey, it's Em, and as promised, I have begun rereading Queen of the Damned. I'm on page 94, which puts me about halfway through, chapter 4 of part 1. It's complicated the way this book is broken out, but basically we'll talk about everything I've read thus far. If you've read it, or if you're reading along, you can watch, obviously spoilers if you haven't read it, but you're just curious. But anyway, we start with Lestat. I am the vampire Lestat. Remember me, he says, and we're like, who could forget? He goes on to explain that, yes, he has survived everything that has happened that we're about to be told about, but that he can't tell the whole story. He's going to have to let other characters tell parts of it. But then, of course, the kicker is that he says, and every time they say how beautiful I am and how magnificent, I promise I'm not putting those words in their mouths. They, mean it. I either heard that in their minds or they said it themselves. I would never lie about something like that. And we're like, but you lie about everything, Lestat, so... He probably doesn't lie about everything, but he does exaggerate. We know he's hyperbolic, especially when it comes to himself and his own magnificence and his own greatness. So that's more or less the intro to the book. And then we get into the proem, which is Marius in Cleopatra's Daughter, which is the vampire bar in San Francisco, reading this very long screed that has been written in black felt tip marker on the red wallpaper of the vampires only back room of the bar. And I was just like, why write this on the, print a pamphlet, dude, hand it out. I don't know. It feels ridiculous, the amount of writing in this thing that explains how everybody's really mad at Lestat and how dare he, tell these stories and make vampires a public thing, as if vampires hadn't already been, a fictionalized thing anyway. I guess I don't understand the conflict necessarily, except that now they're telling the truth and how dare they. I don't know. Since Louis's book, as told by Daniel, or as transcribed by Daniel or whatever, but is considered fiction anyway, I don't know where exactly the sense of danger comes from, at least from the public awareness, because, I understand the those who must be kept aspect. Obviously, that's not something you want everyone to know, vampire or otherwise. You could have some people who want to kill them to kill all the vampires, and you could have some vampires who want to kill them because they're self-loathing. I don't know. It's a complicated psychological issue. Vampires are complicated psychological beings, as we have been told and shown repeatedly. So Marius leaves the bar after a minor confrontation with a young vampire who's like, where do you stand on the vampire? It's like politics. Where do you stand on the vampire Lestat issue? And he goes and he gets a videotape of... He hired somebody to videotape all of Lestat's videos so he could take them back to Akasha and Inkil and, show them the videos, even though they have, apparently, satellite TV in their shrine, and they're able to watch these videos via the satellite. I guess, though, maybe Marius kind of thinks having them, play through and on repeat or something might wake something up in them, or maybe Marius, I can't remember, maybe Marius is just curious and wants to watch them all, even though he's seen them, like he sees them on all the TVs as he's walking past electronics stores. Like, Lestat is everywhere. He's the big thing right now. He's the Harry Styles of his day and age. So, Marius goes back to the shrine, which he has moved to a very cold climate. That's kind of all we know. And he discovers that Inkiel is dead because Akasha has drained him, and now she carries all of the vampire power in her one self. And she basically opens a crevasse in the ice and shoves Marius in there and closes it on him so he can't get out, and she's gone off somewhere. What's the chapter after that? Is it Baby Jinx after that? Oh my god, the Baby Jinx thing. That was not good. Oh no, we get the old guy. Okay, there's some old man who used to be some kind of academic. He's like 91 or 92 now. And he keeps having these dreams about these two redheaded twins, which was his particular focus in academia. He found this legend that was like in ancient Palestine-ish area, the ancient Middle East, and he also found it in the jungles of South America, like Peru. And he was like, these are related, these are connected, there's a story here, like an old myth or story that we don't know, and we need to figure this out. And he got scoffed at, but he starts having dreams again about these redheaded twins, which are the focus of this myth. All of the old paintings show them kneeling next to basically a funeral pyre with plates, and one plate has a heart and one plate has a brain, and the dreams are about them feasting on the heart and brains, or trying to, but soldiers are coming, and this is all just foreshadowing for what's coming. But basically it's another layer to the vampire like history that is being introduced in this book. And the big thing is that some of the vampires and some of the people who have contact with vampires, as in Daniel, are having these dreams about the redheaded twins, and they're nightmares really, and they're getting more intrusive and becoming more like visions and making it hard for people to sleep. And no one knows what it means, but everybody knows that there's some kind of danger involved. There's something bad going to happen. So the old man has his daughter call this woman who used to fund his research. The woman is coming from like Bangkok, but he dies before she gets there. That's all we know about him. We know that this woman who was funding his research is someone that we will, I assume, suss out later. The daughter, who, if the guy is 91 or 92, the daughter must be at least probably in her 60s maybe, is like, this lady should be dead by now, but I guess not. I mean, she must be really old, but I have a feeling we're going to find out that she's really old but doesn't look it, kind of, nod, wink. Okay, so anyway, then we get this chapter about Baby Jinx, who is a 14-year-old vampire girl who rides with a motorcycle gang. It's the worst, you guys. It's just, I have a 14-year-old. And no, even in 1988, no, in 1988, I would have been about 14. Would I have been? Yeah, I would have, maybe. I don't know. Math, no. Anyway, just no. The voice is terrible. And again, it's about this 14-year-old who grew up in Texas, ended up in Detroit as a prostitute, and then a botched abortion. She nearly dies, and a vampire saves her by turning her, and then she's riding with the motorcycle gang of the vampire who turned her, but she decides she needs to go home to Texas and kill her parents, and then the motorcycle gang fails to show up when they said they were going to show up. And so she goes back to, they were supposed to go to California to see Lestat's show. And they kind of want to join Lestat's entourage, right? But Baby Jinx decides, since she can't find the motorcycle gang, she'll go back to St. Louis, which is they stopped on the way from Detroit to Texas in St. Louis, and the motorcycle gang showed Baby Jinx the Coven House, in St. Louis. And she decides, well, that's one place I know I can find other vampires. So I'll backtrack and I'll go there. And it turns out the Coven House is like on fire, it's not on fire, but it has been burnt down. And there's one other vampire there named Laurent. And he and Jinx try to flee, but they don't have time before they also go up in flames, because that's the other thing that's happening. Apparently, at random, like spontaneous vampire combustion is happening. Yeah. Anyway, as she's dying, Baby Jinx kind of rises into the air, and she can see these threads that are connecting her and others, other vampires. She kind of gets a sense of how they're all connected in this kind of spider web of stuff, which we can assume all descends from Akasha at the center and radiates outward, right? And then after Baby Jinx, we get... Is Daniel after Baby Jinx? There's one more. No, we get Pandora. Okay, so Pandora, I read Pandora's book several times, but it's still been about a decade since I've read it. But she was converted by Marius many, many, centuries ago. She's one of the oldest ones. And in this chapter, she's in Tibet or Nepal. She's near Mount Everest, walking in the snow. She understands that there's some kind of danger. She can't hear Marius because Marius made her, and as we know, fledglings can't hear their creators. Their thoughts cannot pass through the barrier, right? So she's kind of hearing it, I guess, as an echo of other vampires who are thinking it or hearing it. And so she goes to this really old vampire named Azim, who has like a temple and followers who come and offer themselves to him, and it's very orgiastic, and there's like this just bodies, people like writhing and dancing, and every now and then Azim will grab one and drain them of their blood. I guess it's a fun cult. Sounds fun. And Pandora's like, I need you to tell me what Marius is saying because I can't hear him. And Azim's like, I don't give a shit about Marius. What I want to know is what are these redheaded twins that I keep dreaming of? And Pandora's like, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. Tell me about Marius. So, they're just at cross purposes here. And Azim finally says, yeah, he's somewhere up north in North America, someplace cold. He's over there. And Pandora's like, look, if I figure out anything about these twins, I'll let you know. I don't know. Pandora feeds on a few people because Azim introduces her to the masses as the goddess Pandora, and then she takes off. And then we get, finally, to the chapter I'm only halfway through. This is Daniel and Armand, and honestly, I remember loving this even when I was younger because I really think Daniel and Armand needed like their own sitcom or something. So if you take into account that Daniel was about 20 when he interviewed Louis, so that would have been in the mid-70s. So now he's in modern day, if he were still alive, he'd be pushing, mid-60s to 70 years old. So I guess for the TV show, that's about right. But he, after interviewing Louis, he goes back to New Orleans. Well, I don't know if he goes back to New Orleans. He goes to New Orleans because he decides he's going to see if he can find Lestat. And so he's like, he finds the address, like, under Lestat's name and the old house in the Garden District that's slowly collapsing. And he finds Lestat's gold pocket watch, and he's all excited because it kind of confirms Louis' story. And then Armand is there, and Armand kidnaps him, locks him up for a few days, and then comes and says, okay, get out of here. Like, I'm gonna see what you do. I'm gonna follow you around and see what you do. And if I get bored with you, I might kill you, or I might just like leave you alone. I don't know. So Daniel starts traveling all over the world, and Armand will pop up at random times, next to him on a bus or whatever. And Daniel's like half intrigued and half terrified of this teenager, this immortal teenager. And then I guess about 4 years in, I think he said, he and Armand start actually having like conversations. Armand like shows up in Boston and orders him like a big dinner at Copley Place. And I guess they start a semi relationship of sorts, but there is this moment. It was always my favorite, and my friend and I used to quote it at each other all the time. But okay. Once Armand had dragged Daniel out of bed in New Orleans and shouted at him, "The telephone! I want you to dial Paris. I want to see if it can really talk to Paris." "God damn it, do it yourself," Daniel had roared. "You're 500 years old and you can't use a telephone? Read the directions. What are you, an immortal idiot?" "I will do no such thing." How surprised Armand had looked. "All right, I'll call Paris for you, but you pay the bill." And I'm just like, that's like comedy. What are you, an immortal idiot? That's funny. And I don't know if we'll get any of that in the TV show, since obviously this Daniel does not know Armand, or did not know Armand. And we did get a little bit of a hint, though. Armand mentions that he doesn't tell living people his name. He tells that to Daniel at one point. He's like, living people don't know me by that name. So maybe the Rashid thing makes sense in some skewed way, but I think we'll still have to see. But anyway, at some point, Armand and Daniel become lovers. It's still a little strange because obviously Armand looks like a teenager. Daniel is at this point about 24. They have a nice night in the ruins of Pompeii. Armand takes like little sips from Daniel and lets Daniel have little sips back. So he won't turn Daniel completely, but they have this kind of relationship. And it's this vampire blood in Daniel that's allowing Daniel to start having these... Carly wants to tell you about it. That's allowing Daniel to have the dreams about the redheaded twins that are kind of slowly driving him crazy. He's 32 now, so it's been 12 years. And he like still wants Armand to transform him. And Armand says, "I wouldn't do that to someone I love, and I wouldn't do that to someone I hated. I wouldn't do that to anybody." So, if I remember correctly, I know where this ends up going, but we'll get there. This, like I said, I'm still partway through the Daniel and Armand chapter. I've got like 20 more pages of it, ish. But so far, they're the most fun, even though they're utterly ridiculous. They are the most fun that we've had in this book. Everything else is just kind of, God, the baby Jinx thing is just so bad. And I'm like, what's the point? Aside from trying to show us like the average everyday vampire out in the world, young ones that are getting kind of burned up because they don't have as much resilience or something. It's unclear. Baby Jinx was also having dreams of the twins, I think, if I'm remembering right. I'm trying to forget that chapter already because, God, it was so bad. But yeah, so that's where we are. And I do think, again, that Armand and Daniel just need to have their own thing, be their own thing, do their own thing. And I know I've read the Vampire Armand, the book. I read that one a long time. I only read it once when it first came out. So I don't remember a lot about it. Except that it was not one of my favorites at the time. Again, I might feel differently now. But that's where we are. Akasha's wandering. Marius is stuck. Pandora's trying to go save him. Lestat is getting ready for his big concert because this is all the lead up to the Halloween concert. And Daniel is wandering in Chicago and kind of thinking that he wants Armand to come get him, because apparently this happens frequently. Daniel takes off for a while, and then Armand, a few months later, will come and fetch him home, because they live in Miami now, on something called the Night Island. It's very 1980s, okay? It's very Miami Vice. Like, I'm like, oh, they live in a Miami Vice set. Armand walks around in his, like, white shirt and white slacks, and, and I was like, oh, I liked Miami Vice in the 80s. It's funny because in the 80s, as I recall, cities like New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, Key West, those are the old charm cities, and then cities like Atlanta and Miami were considered the sophisticated places to be if you wanted to stay in the South. And so that's clearly like, ooh, slick and shiny and, sophisticated. That would be what Armand would want, and therefore they're in Miami. So, I don't know. It's just very much of its time, I'd say. There's probably a lot of glass block involved or something. But anyway, that's where we are. That's how things are shaping up. At some point, we will get Lestat back to tell things from his perspective. All of the other chapters are told, third person, but like limited perspective. Like your Marius's chapter is third person, but clearly you're from Marius's point of view. The Daniel chapter, again, he's thinking about Armand. He's thinking about their relationship as he stumbles around Chicago. He's like crazy rich from the royalties of this book, even though he published it obviously under an assumed name. But he can't seem to keep himself together long enough. He's, long enough to... he's slowly losing his mind, basically, is where we're at. Poor Daniel. And, I can't help but picture him as Christian Slater, because in this book he's still young-ish, and in the TV series he's obviously much older, so it's going to be Christian Slater in my mind, but it is not Antonio Banderas, because that was not good casting, so I've just kind of got this amorphous Armand in my head, because the actor for the TV series obviously also doesn't look the way Armand is described, at least not in the books, so I've kind of had to come up with something of my own. If I could draw, but I can't. Anyway, again, I gotta stop rambling. If you've read it, let me know, but don't go beyond this point. Even though I've read all these books, it's been so long, I don't remember most of them. I used to know all the details, and now that information has been replaced with other information. So I'm enjoying rediscovering it, although like I knew when I opened up to the Baby Jinx chapter, I was like, oh, I remember this was not a particularly good. And it doesn't, the impact is nil. Again, I think it was just color is like to build out the world of vampires a little bit instead of making it seem like it's just these few. Like, it's like, no, there's lots of them, and look what they're doing and going through and the different ways they live. Obviously, not all of them are sophisticated in their suits and living in Miami. Some of them are from the backwoods of Texas and grew up poor and whatever. It's like, okay, fair enough. But what are we here for? Well, we're here for the rich, pretty vampires, mostly, I think. Yeah. And, I mean, we're here ostensibly for Lestat if we ever get him back. But like I said, I'm kind of enjoying Daniel and Armand, so I'm fine with that. The twins thing, we'll get there, but I remember it. It's one of those things where I'm like, oh, now we've gotten unnecessarily complicated. Like, we had an origin story, and we've decided to complicate that further for whatever reason. But anyway, enough from me. I'll keep reading. I'll probably check in another week to 10 days, depending on how far I get. Besides this, I'm reading Husband Material by Alexis Hall, and I've got a library book, A Restless Truth, which is the sequel to A Marvelous Light. And since that's a library book, I kind of have to prioritize it because it does have to go back in a couple weeks. So it may take me a little longer to read the next part of this book, just because I do need to get at least through A Restless Truth. And so far, so good. I mean, I miss Edwin and Robin because they are not the main characters in this story. This is Robin's sister Maud on a steamship crossing from New York back to England and trying to find a murderer. And it's fun and all of that. And we get Lord Hawthorne, who is intriguing. But I liked Edwin and Robin, and I kind of wish we had Edwin and Robin. This is going to be a trilogy, and I guess, like, maybe each book is going to have a slightly different perspective. But anyway, I'll let you know more about that when I'm done with it. And that is where we stand for now. Thanks for hanging out, and take care.